But in the meanwhile, the president is saying that Roy Moore is the one who's needed to make America safe again. New York City Councilman already with Joe Borelli with us right now. Joe, let's say Moore wins. And the Republican leadership has winced at that prospect. So he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. But some have advocated, despite Alabama voters' wishes, that they might move to alienate him or throw him out. They'd have to change some of the rules because these are all charges that, dating young women that he says is not the case, that go back decades. But what happens?
Well, I think that's very unlikely to happen, and there's not much precedent for that to happen. I think certainly with the Franken resignation, you would see some political pressure mount heavy on him, and that's why I think you had someone like Tim Scott come out and say yesterday on Fox News that Roy Moore would immediately face an ethics investigation. I think Republicans are in, I don't want to say a no-win situation, but they really didn't have many good options going into tomorrow's election. On one hand, you have Roy Moore, who for lack of a better way to describe it, is not the ideal candidate, but also his loss in this election could jeopardize the entire GOP agenda and everything the president is trying to accomplish. Not just the tax plan, but also judicial appointees, executive branch appointees, immigration reform, anything they'd like to see happen before the fallout of 2018 and whatever's to occur then could be jeopardized.
Who will get the blame for that? Now, the president has put himself out there to say Moore is the guy who's doing these robocalls for Moore. But they also hope that by the time, whoever wins that race is seated in Washington, the tax bill will be voted on, making it a moot point. But what do you think?
Well, I think certainly that is the more likely situation. Gary Cohn was out there, telegraphing that the president is open for whatever compromise that can be worked out in the short-term future. I think this is more of a year-long problem for the Republicans if they lose, because nothing changes in the dynamic in the Senate until the 2018 elections, and we're not exactly sure what would happen then either.
Do you think the president is looking at this Moore race as not just a left-right thing or a pro-agenda thing, but that he's looking over his own shoulder, that if Moore is incapacitated, whether if it votes in and the Republicans try to kick him to the curb or launch an ethics investigation or whatever, they're getting closer to the president allegations that he had to address. Now, he won the election with all those allegations, so as the White House has seemingly insisted, it's a moot point. But maybe it's a new point now. What do you think?
Well, it could be a new point, but I really do think the president is looking at this more from a policy standpoint, and the evidence of that really comes in this robocall he recorded. He's not out there saying that Roy Moore is this backslapping great guy you want to have a beer with. In fact, no senators have come out and really vouched for the character of Roy Moore, but what the president said in his robocall is that this is about abortion, this is about the Second Amendment, this is about tax reform. These are about the issues that we care about. So I don't necessarily know the personal stuff is what the president is trying to make this about.
I get the impression, Joe, that the president is moving on from an expected tax win. A lot of the focus seems to be on infrastructure, something that, draws a lot of Democrats, maybe whoever wins this election in Alabama. And the president doesn't need it as much, doesn't need a Republican to win that state as much in that event, because he will have much more support on the left, for example, than he's had on any other initiative up to date.
Well, that might be true on infrastructure. Certainly Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have expressed a willingness to work with him on that. But on every other issue, there really hasn't been much Democratic cooperation, and we certainly don't need another Democrat to add to the resist movement. Whether you're talking about health care, which failed by really just a few, one vote in the Senate. I mean, this is why having a 51-49 majority is something that the president prefers not to have. As Leader McConnell said, Roy Moore might not be fit for the Senate, but there are no good options.
Yeah, you can't lose but one. And when you're down to that, with the vice president being the tiebreaker, is it your sense right now that if Moore were to lose, he's down 10 points in this poll, but as we've been saying, all these polls are all over the map. Who's that going to be on? Who takes the blame for that?
You know, I think it's going to be first and foremost on Roy Moore. You know, he wasn't able to get out of these accusations that frankly stuck. I mean, I can't answer whether they're true or not, but they certainly had an impact on the race. I think really, though, what we're seeing with these polls, that we had this Fox News poll that came out with a 10-point majority for Doug Jones. We also had another poll the day before with Roy Moore up 9%.
Right. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing really wild estimates of turnout, and there's going to be no way to predict it going into tomorrow.
All right, buddy. Thank you very much. Joe Borelli.